So, for those of you who have heard our episode already, you know that Cara teased a really fun kind of like possibly legend myth-esque story in relation to the hymn. I'm totally blanking right now. Commit thy grief, commit thy every grief. So I kind of begged her to give us the actual story because she didn't in the episode. And if you are listening to this, it's probably because you have faithfully and smartly signed up for our weekly newsletter, of which this is a bonus clip. So, Cara, why don't you tell us what is the other story in relation, the more mythical sounding story in relation to this song, Commit Thy Every Grief?
It really does sound mythical. And I looked it up, and it is a widely told story, but I couldn't kind of verify it.
Mm-hmm.
So the story is that there was this German peasant called Dobyr who lived in a village near Warsaw in Poland. But just remember that at this time, the borders were very different.
Mm-hmm.
So he and his family were really poor. They hadn't been able to pay the rent on their home. It was winter, and his landlord had basically said to them, "You've not paid, you've got to leave." They were going to be evicted the next day.
Mm.
Now, Dobyr was a very faithful believer, and he was praying with his family, and afterwards they sang Paul Gerhardt's hymn, Commit Thou All Thy Griefs.
Mm.
And as they came to the final verse, he heard a tapping at the window. Now, when he was younger, his father had tamed a raven, but then set it free. So he'd found this bird and it had fallen out of the nest, and he'd looked after it and raised it, and then he'd been like, okay, go make your way in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But the raven had come back and was tapping at the window.
What?
And in its beak, it had a ring that was covered in jewels. So
What?
So Dobyr took it and was kind of like, I can't just sell this, it's not honest, even though we really need it.
Mm-hmm.
So he took it to his minister, and his minister recognized it, and it turned out that it belonged to the king at the time, King Stanislaus, who had lost it somewhere, and apparently this raven had found it. So the minister took the ring back to the king, and the king asked to see Dobyr.
Mm-hmm.
And because instead of selling it and helping himself, he'd returned it to the king. The king rewarded him richly with money and with cattle from his own farms and all that stuff. So a year later, when Dobyr completed building his new house that he'd been able to buy with all the money the king had given him, he hung an iron tablet over the door, and on this iron tablet was a picture of the raven with the ring in its beak and the verse from the hymn beginning, "Thou everywhere hast sway," engraved on it.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty crazy story. I also liked that in one of the versions his wife's called Cara. But I looked really hard to see if I could find a picture of this iron tablet, but I couldn't find it anywhere, so I don't know if...
How true it is.
Yeah, the story's probably not true. It does sound very folktale.
It feels really magical, but so
it also
do some
feels
of the...
quite providential. So
yeah, it does. And you know, you've heard stories like that, and you're like, well, God is sovereign. Like, why couldn't he have made that happen the way it did? Oh, I hope it's true. That'd be really cool.
We'll find out when we get to heaven and be like, hey, is there like a German peasant guy?
Where is he? Tell us the truth.